for having me. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks. Welcome back to the Typical Skeptic podcast channel. And if you're listening on Spotify, Apple, whatever, just rate, review, and follow me or whatever. Tonight, I have an amazing guest. He's back for a second time. He's the author of The Children of Orion, Finding the Cryptoterrestrials, and his name is Ryan Musgrave Evans. He's from Australia. And tonight, we're going to be talking to Ryan, and he's going to be talking about the different contact experiences, abductions, and history, and how they compare to this group called the Cryptoterrestrials. Ryan is also an experiencer himself, so he will obviously get his contact experiences. So buckle up. This is an amazing podcast. And let me tell you a little bit more about Ryan. He resides in Victoria, Australia. He has a diploma of education in elementary from the Swinburne University in Melbourne and has a Bachelor of Arts first class honors in philosophy, La Trobe University, Melbourne, a tutor of Irish and Gaelic languages. He knows that well. And in all kinds of other stuff. He's in religious folklore studies, philosophy, linguistics. He's a fluent speaker of Irish and Scottish and Gaelic. So he's very well versed in the abduction phenomena too. So I want to welcome to the show, Ryan. Thank you for coming back on. How are you?
Hey, Robert. Thanks for having me, man. I'm really good.
So
thanks for having me back, brother.
Yeah. So for the new audience that might not have heard of you, I really like your theory. Can you tell the people a little bit about your theory about the cryptoterrestrials and how you got behind that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll do a bit of a refresher. For those who haven't come across me before or haven't heard the last one that we did together. Yeah, the cryptoterrestrials. Okay, so this is a term that was coined by a guy called Mac Tonys originally. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. He passed away quite young. He was a genius, in my opinion. The cryptoterrestrial word actually means, hidden earthlings, and he coined that to put it forward as an alternative theory, an alternative hypothesis to explain the UFO reality we seem to find ourselves in today, but not just that, to also apply it to older cases in history and folklore of abduction events or apparent close encounter events. Some of these events very familiar to us that study ufology today, like from fairy lore, particularly the Celtic fairy faith. Mac Tonys wrote his book that went into that kind of thing in detail and looked for the undercurrents, the familiar substratum that goes between these ancient phenomena in ancient times, modern UFO phenomena in the modern era. And he tried to demonstrate that these were more than likely identical beings causing these same kind of phenomena. Now, I thought that his term was particularly appropriate for what's going on today. First and foremost, because in my opinion, a lot of the abduction events and a lot of the attributes of the beings that seem to be we experience nowadays and are subjecting people to these kinds of experiences, they have attributes that really conform closely to perhaps speculating about beings that have a relationship with the Earth rather than being extraterrestrial beings. So if you have the hypothesis that everyone's very familiar with, the extraterrestrial hypothesis that suggests the beings behind close encounter phenomena are certainly from another planet, not Earth, but even extrasolar, people normally say, as in outside our solar system. Why is it, Mac Tonys asks, and I agree, that these beings seem to have a particular interest in our genetics? And certainly sometimes even, according to some cases, and some witnesses and some experiences, can interbreed with us, copulate in the old-fashioned kind of way. So you've got up in 1957 in Brazil, let's just say, we've got the cases there. We've got cases in Sydney as well.
Antonio Villas-Boas, right? Antonio.
Villas-Boas. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Villas-Boas, and there's several of them as well. Thanks for that. My mind went black then, Robert. Yeah. So these cases, there's a genetic affiliation there, and there's these kinds of sexual interactions that, if these beings were actually completely and totally extraterrestrial, this seems to be a bizarre way of interacting with us. And even just the collection of genetics from us, even when it's not to the point of, even when it's in a more clinical way, and it's not actual sexual interactions and things like that. What could they want with us if they don't have a genetic affiliation with our planet and with us? So cryptoterrestrial, I thought, that's a very interesting way of seeing it, and I really like the term, and I think it actually helps to explain a lot. Now, I've had experiences myself, as you noted, Robert. Now, the beings, there's much more to them than that. The cryptoterrestrial umbrella is just, it's one kind of facet. I think it's an excellent way of seeing them, to start with that kind of flesh and blood reality and a nuts and bolts reality. And before sort of wandering off into the woo-woo and considering some of these sort of multi-dimensional aspects and quasi-spiritual aspects of the abduction phenomena and the UFO phenomena, to bring it back down to sort of like a solid reality, and then perhaps move on from there. Otherwise, people just get lost. So now, in the experiences I've had, from when I was a kid, I've had various experiences, and some of them like sporadic experiences over my life with beings that I thought perhaps were fairies or elves or something like that. And as Mac Tony's had noted, there's a lot of similarities with the abduction lore early on, and some of the beings, even physical descriptions, match quite closely, conform quite closely to some of the races of ETs that people allegedly are in contact with nowadays. So I had a lot of experiences of a poltergeist kind of fashion, even seeing beings that struck me as looking like maybe they were tree spirits. And it wasn't until perhaps about 10 years ago that my experiences sort of took off more, and also took on more of a bent of like a more stereotypical ET kind of scenario, with like clinical situations or procedures, sort of typical abductee phenomenon kind of stuff. And then I started to think, hold on a sec, maybe there's this relationship between my older experiences and the newer ones. So, but there are other facets to it. I do agree with people that cryptoterrestrial is just one element of it, but it is the word that I decided to really cling onto and attach to, because you have to start somewhere. Now, the beings themselves have told me a lot about themselves in more recent times, and it's stuff I haven't gone into in that first book, but I am writing another book and I'm talking a lot about that kind of stuff as well. In the first book, I only really talk about my own experiences towards the end, and the vast bulk of the book is me looking at different cases through history, inspired by Jacques Vallée, the great Jacques Vallée, that noted these similarities himself. And Mac Tony's built on these kinds of things. But
Charles Hall as well. You draw on Charles Hall, right? Too, right?
Charles Hall as well, yeah. Yes. Now, there's a particular kind of fairy race, Jacques Vallée and also Mac Tony's really focused in on the Gaelic fairy faith. There's a particular kind of race that was called the gentry, or Nahuishlan in Gaelic. They chirped and whistled, tall, fair beings, magical beings float around on the horizon, and things are looking like will-o'-wisp and illuminated beings and entities, lived inside mountains and subterraneous dwellings, could become invisible at will, would abduct people sometimes. And that description I just gave of the Gaelic gentry from old Gaelic folklore is perfectly applicable to Charles Hall's tall whites. So that is a major factor that I talk about in my book when I'm building a profile. I'll build what I call a cryptoterrestrial profile, a CT profile for brevity. And I look for the mutual characteristics between the older fairy faith, and particularly those beings, Nahuishlan, compare them to the tall whites of Charles Hall. So, your listeners are probably familiar with Charles Hall, but I'll very, very quickly, if it's okay, Robert, I'll just do a brief refresher for people.
Sure.
Charles Hall, he went to, I think it was in the years 1962 to 64, but I might be wrong about that. Mid 60s anyway. He was allocated to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, and he was a weather observer. So his position in the Air Force was weather observer, letting balloons aloft with a theodolite, measuring their speed across the sky, phoning it in. This was his job, and he'd go out there on his own into the desert. And he did this for 2 years, and he later came to understand that a lot of people that have been there wouldn't last as long as he did. They would be terrified. They didn't like talking about their experiences, and they'd leave. But basically, he himself stuck to it, and he came to understand why people were bailing out on this. He was subjected to prolonged and regular interaction with a race of beings, chalk white in appearance, large blue eyes, that were subterranean dwelling, that would bark and chirp and whistle. They had advanced technologies. They would sometimes, when he was moving around, he'd have, missing time. He'd say he felt his mind clouding over and things like that. Now, this is the same race that I ended up identifying as being the very race that I have interactions and encounters with. They have said to me that they call themselves the Madjana. That's not a word that Charles Hall used, but so Nahuishlan from Old Gaelic times, the Madjana, or the tall whites as Charles Hall called them, are identical beings that have been here for a very, very long time. Now, I identify them as cryptoterrestrials. Charles Hall thought of them as being aliens. He didn't know where they were from. He speculated they might be from Arcturus, I think, but he based that on information. I think he was looking through theodolite one day. He suspected one of them had been looking through it, and he thought that the being had been looking at Arcturus system. There were a couple other reasons he thought maybe they were from Arcturus. They were evasive in that they wouldn't tell him where they were from. So in my book, I talk about how they're definitely from the Earth. Now I know that they are because they since have told me these kinds of things. But what I try to do in the book is leave my experiences out of it as much as possible, and I try to be objective and build a profile of characteristics to demonstrate through older encounter law, folklore, up till modern days. You can follow these beings. You can take note and build a compendium of characteristics of their appearance, their habitation, even their spiritual systems, their technologies, the kinds of play and behavior, their languages, and all that kind of thing. And as you move through and use this cryptoterrestrial profile to find them in other cases, each new case serves to inform the profile ever further, builds upon it. And so, I sort of finished my book early and thought there's so much left to write. So now I'm writing the next one and building and still seeking them further to demonstrate to people in a more objective way than just saying, I'm an experiencer, this is what beings have told me, blah, blah, blah. To try and engage people in a more objective, rational kind of way for those kinds of people that want or require that. And try to demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt and establish that they exist.
I got a question. They have some really weird stuff. Like they have suit technology that me and you talked about. I wanted to bring that up because I think that's really important. Like that they wear suits, and that's why people could be getting tricked into thinking that they're different beings. And then also another cool thing that you brought up last podcast I thought we should mention is you said, I thought this was so funny. You said in their craft that they have memorabilia from our planet. They have bus seats or something like that. I'm just giving an example. That might not be it, but they have weird shit from our planet in their craft, right? Nostalgic stuff. It seems like was that right? Did I get that right? And also about the suits they wear. If you could touch on those things.
Okay, yeah. I'll talk about the craft that I've been on first. Not necessarily not memorabilia, but functional objects. They rely on our infrastructure to a large extent. So they have, now their history is very complicated. They are a kind of future human, but it depends on what you mean by time travel, because they actually cross timelines, and you could argue that they're more interdimensional beings than future humans. But they brought with them a large amount of technology, craft, and technology, advanced technology, cloaking technology, and things like that of all different kinds. But they don't have the means or the access to the materials or the infrastructure that they had back where they were originally from. This gets complicated. They were from a version of Earth at one stage, but anyway, they are limited now as to what they can build new technology with now that they're here, and so they rely on our Homo sapiens infrastructure, our materials, our fabrications, which means now they utilize this to great effect, but to use their science, to use our technologies to superior effect. So these kinds of what some people sometimes call RV craft, like and also Tic Tacs. In my opinion, the Tic Tac craft that are famous nowadays in media talked about, I think, are probably the same craft as the craft that Charles Hall called RV, like recreational vehicles, because they basically look like an RV or a small bus without wheels. They even sometimes have windows along the sides. I've been in them several times, and they have, yes, like they have bus seats. The seats for the pilot at the front look like they're from our fighter planes, probably. And they appear to be, they're not seamless, you know, like they haven't been, like, not, the craft that they brought with them, the composers, some of their fleet are seamless, biological grown in zero-G vehicles that are commonly talked about in ufology. When people talk about, you know, you'll see a craft zipping along and it's like a seamless magical thing, you know. Sorry about that. So,
wow.
Yeah. Now, but we live really close to a roundabout here with really busy traffic, so I apologize. I've closed the windows and the door and all that kind of stuff. And this new mic, I'm not very used to it, and it's probably picking up all sorts of sounds. But yes, but the craft that I've been in are obviously made out of separate sections. There's sectional build, you know. Now, Charles Hall had talked about this as well in his books, the Millennial Hospitality books. Now, they first came out in the early 2000s. He coined the term tall bites that's popularly used in ufology now. People often use that. But he was the first guy. Before that, usually these kinds of beings were called Nordics. Nordics is an older term for them. Sometimes people make a distinction between tall whites and Nordics and things like that, which I think is largely artificial, in my opinion. But so in his Millennial Hospitality books, he talked about these RV craft, amongst other craft, large, dark craft, and smaller vessels and things like this, and longer ones that as well, that were similar to the RV kind of ones, but look more like a carriage from a train, maybe, or like an airliner without the wings and things like this. So you get them these different lengths. But he said that they had microwaves in them, hammocks, showers that looked like they were straight from hardware stores at the time, you know, in the 60s and things like that. So they were doing that kind of thing back then, and they're still doing that kind of thing, from what I can tell of being on board a couple as well, a few. Having said that, I have seen other craft, but not as far as I'm able to recollect anyway, because they, of course, they manipulate your memory, memory manipulation and mesmerization and things like that, which they had apologized to me about. But now, there are other craft I've seen as well that are more, in my opinion, probably of the kind that are seamless and grown and biological in some kind of way. But yeah, yes, for sure. So it's less memorabilic like that, where they're some kind of keepsake or something from our culture or our technology, but that they are using our technology because they are here and require that to. Now, I'll move on to the suits, as you talked about before. Now, the suits, so some people will be seeing this and actually have video, won't they? But there'll be people with only audio. But my book here has an excellent picture on the front of the suits. I call them boa suits, named after Antonio Villas Boas, because he described something like these suits, or a version of these suits, in his 1957 encounter. And then subsequently, there've been a lot of different people that have interacted with beings in these kinds of suits. So the suits can change color, but they're normally, when they're not activated, they look dark gray or black. Skin tight, a helmet that also has like a nose piece that hangs down and flares out a bit, although there's a few different shapes to the nose piece, but most of the ones I've seen have sort of have a flared out look, and then they pass up over the top of the helmet. This is for amplification of sounds, because they hoot and roar, and that's another topic we can talk about perhaps later if you want to, some of their linguistic camouflage languages and things like that, where they mimic wildlife sounds. They wear goggles that glow red at night, and then also a mouthpiece, some kind of breathing apparatus, which I'm pretty sure is just to filter the air, because they can breathe our air. They can, but they're susceptible to allergies. And so they quite often wear a breathing device that is merely a filter for dust and pollen and whatnot like that. These suits have cloaking abilities. When sometimes they can appear as though they're sort of like people are familiar with the idea of the Predator, the old Predator movies. Yeah. Where you have that kind of heat shimmer kind of look, a distortion. Sometimes it looks like that, but sometimes you would not know they were there. They are completely invisible. And I'm not quite sure why sometimes their suits seem to be more efficient than at other times in that way. The suits have prosthetic clawed hands for self-defense. And their hands are very, very long as well. Their 4 fingers are much longer than ours, and then they have a small vestigial thumb that is only about half the length of ours, further up their hand. So yeah, they can cloak. They can become intangible in these suits, which means they can pass through solid objects. They can accommodate foreign objects into their form. I'm not quite sure, I don't know how that works. They're shifting their atomic structure or something like that. But to walk through solid objects, to walk through walls, they can be impervious to harm with them as well, have a field so that you can't hurt them in any way with bladed weapons or with firearms or anything like that. And super strength and super speed. They're basically super soldier suits. So I call them BOA suits. Now these suits, this is their stealth attire, and also the attire that their garb that their gear, military grade, because they have they have 2 separate armies. Actually, they have a religious order, which is like sacred monks, and then they have a secular army as well. But so in these suits, if you see them in these suits, I think this is probably where a lot of ideas about tall black aliens has come from. When people see tall whites in their suits, they ascribe a different name to them. Now, in these suits as well, they can, and also they have telepath technology, and I call it telepath tech. So in their helmets, they have a technology that allows them to infiltrate your thoughts, implant ideas, instill fear into your mind if they wish to repel you without actually having a physical interaction. So if you're walking around in a forest or something like that, and all of a sudden you feel like you shouldn't be there, there's a negative feeling, a negative force. It is a possibility, at least, that they are sending you away, trying to move you away. They use that on animals. They use that on humans. They can send linguistic messages into your mind, and also abstract ideas and thoughts, and also visual images, and take over your eyes and present other images to you and things like that if they want you to see things. Now, these particular people don't have a natural level of telepathy or psychic abilities any more than ours. So they rely on technologies. All of this stuff's technology. They're highly spiritual people or religious people. They have their own belief systems. But having said that, they are flesh and blood. They're the flesh of our flesh, the bone of our bone. They use nuts and bolts. About the telepath tech.
I'm sorry, I just hit record.
Yeah, so with this telepathic technology, telepath tech, I call it in my book. Yeah, they can invade your mental reality and exert influence on you in lots of different kinds of ways, just for linguistic communication as well.
What's interesting about that? I was thinking, like, lately that I was thinking about writing a book on, like, people that think they have psychiatric disorders, and I was thinking that it could be like either interdimensional entities or what people would think of as demons. I'm not religious, but or this cryptoterrestrials, because a lot of times I think I was saying this in another podcast, people that have schizophrenia, they realize that it's an outside entity giving them those thoughts, and they can actually get better. They can control it. They put those thoughts out. I think that's a big thing of what we're dealing with here, right? And you think it's these entities?
Yeah, well, that may be some of the time or a lot of the time. I hesitate to say all of the time. You could explain all sort of schizophrenic
Yeah.
intrusive thoughts and things like that. But I'd imagine that a lot of the time it could be something like that that people are dealing with and not realize. Yeah. Um, there's, I think with schizophrenia, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think most often the auditory hallucinations that people can experience with schizophrenia feel to the person like they're hearing them with their ears, that they're actually hearing voices that are external to them, like they can hear people in the next room and there's no one there, or someone's talking to them and they're beside them, or things like that.
That's pretty wild, to actually be able to.
Yeah.
That's something that I feel like that has to be something with psychic ability and interdimensional entities, right? Or maybe no.
Maybe, yeah. Well, with the technology that I've experienced that they use, it's less like it's an auditory hallucination, and it's more like it's a silent expression within your own mind. It's more akin to something like your own reading voice when you're reading silently to yourself.
And that's dangerous. That's dangerous, right?
And this is one of their main ways of communicating, and it feels like it almost feels like there's a texture to it. It almost feels like it's 3D in some way. Like it's like, even though it's associated with language, and it will be in a language, like in your own language, like English, for us, say, as our native language, they'll express themselves in English, say, but it will be articulated much faster than in a much shorter space of time than a person would normally take to say a whole sentence or something. So even though it's identifiable as being, say, in English, it's like a packet of information almost. You don't hear it with your ears. It's like you're hearing it in the center of your mind. Sometimes it's obviously feminine still, sometimes obviously masculine, or sometimes just neither in particular, just neutral. But it's not an auditory hallucination that sounds like something coming from next to you. Now, I have been in their presence and they've been talking to me and things like that as well, using, just the way we would, vocal utterances or whatever. But quite often they'll use this way of delivering information to you. And if you're particularly close to them when they use this technology, you can feel a thump. It's like it's a thump in the middle of your head. And sometimes even my ears pop. And I don't know what's going on there with the physicality of all of that, but like
there's so much neurological stuff in the brain, right? They could be tapping into the brain. Like, it makes me think that more the reality is more of a computerized simulation than we think, or that our brains are much more like computers than we think, because they can just tap into us like that. That's weird.
Yeah.
And then, with abductions, they can put people out and paralyze them like nothing. Like, they can put them to sleep like no tomorrow. Like they could do it like this. It's very weird. Whereas we have to be long range with our psychic abilities. Like we can remote view and see things, like, but it's I don't know what they're using, if that's all technology as well. Like, and let me ask you this: are those same aliens that are doing the abductions, like, do they have a link to the Greys, or what are your thoughts on that? Like,
well, these particular ones, the Mudgeonah or tall whites, they do abduct people sometimes, and it's supposed to be much more on a voluntary basis. But the thing is they manipulate your memories as well. So if you have volunteered or you are consenting to some kind of abduction, then they remove your memory of having consented, and then it's a question ethically as to whether they've removed the consent. In their opinion, they haven't. But whereas there are other kinds of beings, like some of what would normally in ufology be called greys, perhaps. There's a couple of different versions of them that I know about. Some of them are taller with more pale skin. The skin texture is more like a belly of a snake or a lizard with slight claws. They have large eyes, but you can still see the whites of their eyes, very large craniums. And then there's another version that's a darker grey with even more pronounced scales, slightly smaller head, shorter, with completely black eyes. They, from what I understand, actually have the biological ability to intrude into your mind and manipulate your thoughts and all that kind of stuff, but genetically engineered into them. It's not a case of, normal evolution through natural selection. This is they've been messing with their own genomes for a long time now, which has caused a lot of issues for them, and which is why they need our genes in the first place and to interact with us. But because of all of the deliberate manipulation causing issues in the genome, DNA genomic systems are a holistic, natural, systemic thing, and as soon as you are a race that thinks you're cleverer than you actually are and start manipulating your own genes to lengthen your lifespan or include biological evolution in your additions in your mind to allow you telepathic abilities, pronounced telepathic abilities, and make these kinds of changes, unforeseen symptoms arise because of that, which you can't necessarily deal with. Not through further genetic engineering, which just causes more and sends you off on this tangent so that your genomic system, your DNA starts to unravel, which is the case of a lot of these races that need us as vehicles of natural selection to bolster their genomes again, to return to something like they were before they started this kind of manipulation. The gray ones.
One case I wanted to bring up was Peter Corey. I've had him on my show, and we've talked about him before. That's an amazing case. There was a book written after it called Hair of the Alien. If you could talk about that and what they found, that was pretty amazing.
Oh yeah. Thanks for that, Peter Curry. Yeah, at the start of the interview, before my mind was going blank, I'm thinking I can't remember these dudes' names. Peter Curry up in Sydney. Yeah. It's wonderfully interesting experiences that guy had. I think he's had experiences all his life, and he was born in Lebanon and came out here as a young boy, but he has memories of seeing UFOs. I think he was playing on a rooftop in Lebanon with a group of kids, and some craft came down, and the rest of his friends were all frozen, like they'd been switched off. Which is another ability these two guys have, where other people in the room will just vague out and they'll talk to the person they want to talk to, and then everyone will be switched back on again. So he had that happen from a young age. And his mother as well recalls when he was a baby, I think she looked out the window and there was this tall, fair man standing at the window looking at her, moved away. So, it was in 1992. I mean, he's had lots and lots of experiences, and lots in the 80s, I think. But the one that people normally think of when they think of Peter Curry is his 1992 experience, and that was the book. That was the main topic of the Bill Chalker book. Bill Chalker, Australian researcher, the book called Hair of the Alien. And other forensic evidence or something, I think of that, like it's called. This is a cool book. I recommend people buy that. It's just on Amazon. The Hair of the Alien by Bill Chalker. He considers a few different cases, world cases and Australian cases, but he particularly focuses on Peter Curry. 1992, he woke up and there was a woman. He was lying in bed. I think he felt like there was there was movement on the bed, and he thought it felt like a cat pouncing onto the bed or something like that. But when he looked, there was one woman with darker skin and huge black eyes sitting on the edge of the bed, naked, and another woman sitting on him, answering the basic description of Charles Hall's tall whites. Very tall. Peter Curry's 6 foot tall or over 6 foot tall himself. He said she was a good foot taller than him, I think, or would have been if she stood up. Huge blue eyes. He said white, fine hair, really fine white hair. That's another thing that Charles Hall talks about, that Antonio Villas-Boas talks about. These people have very fine blonde hair or white hair that's not as abundant as our own. But and then they had this interaction. He became afraid and he bit her. He said he bit her and he felt like something broke off in his throat, and then he was having trouble swallowing, and then they were gone. And they were having these interactions. He said they were communicating to his mind, talking about how there was going to be a baby from this experience.
He copulated with her, right? He had sex with her, right?
Oh yeah, I think he said. Well, that is the implication, I think, even though I think he says he doesn't actually remember that act itself. Like, she was already on him by the time he was talking about how he had, just strange mental images in his mind and felt almost like he wasn't inside his body at one stage. And there was obviously a lot of mental manipulation, pacifying or putting him into a state of hypnosis or mesmerization anyway as well. So he's under mental influence. So that would just be, you know, an amazing experience in itself and all that kind of thing. But what makes it beyond interesting and so compelling and so, you know, filled with well, I think the implications of it are just incredible, and I talk about it in my book as well. How he then went to the bathroom and he found a hair that he put into a bag that wasn't his, a pale hair. Now he set that aside, and then since Bill Chalker, the guy who wrote the book about his experiences, wrote The Hair of the Alien, he and some other scientists did analyses on this hair and found that it was human, but had some bizarre qualities to it, where the shaft of the hair seemed to have Mongoloid DNA, Asian DNA, but of a very rare kind and type, whereas the hair root seemed to come from a different person. So it was like it was a hair graft. And the root itself, which presumably would hold the DNA of the individual herself, was rare Gaelic Basque DNA.
Wait, let me ask you this. Do you think the alien could have been using that body as a container? Like using some kind of rare Basque person / Mongoloid as some kind of weird like body container? Like maybe they have body containers that they have to transfer into, like their consciousness or something like that, to copulate.
Well, I think that's just them, because this is the way they look. The ones I've seen, I've done a lot of sketches, and I put some of the sketches in my book, and I'll put some more in other books as well. This appearance, that's what they look like. That's an excellent description that he gives of her physicality, and that Charles Hall gives as well. Now, the reason that I think that they have rare Gaelic Basque DNA is because they've been here for centuries, for millennia, interbreeding with us occasionally anyway, that they now have Gaelic DNA in them structurally, and Basque. This is all to, again, reinvigorate and reinforce their own genomes and allow them to continue reproducing themselves, because they would die out. They're so impoverished genetically from deliberate genetic manipulation and other issues that have maladies and pathologies that they can't deal with, other than trying to re-inject our healthy DNA back into their people,
whatever they are, right?
Generations, you know.
Well, let me ask you this: what do they eat? Like, what would you say their genetic makeup is? Like, where do you think their genetic makeup comes from, or what planet do they come from? And then, or what is their existence? And then also, what do they eat?
Well, they are a version of us from about 52,000 years in our future, but it gets pretty complicated because they're from the future of a different timeline. We are not going to evolve or change into them anymore. And they have come here they've been here for a long time, and you could say they're originally from Earth. So that's why I use the term cryptoterrestrial. Also, they've been here for so long. So they're an indigenous humanoid, indigenous to Earth, but it gets quite complicated because it was a different version of Earth, but won't necessarily go into that because it does get quite complicated. But having said that, at a point
it's timelines, right? It's different timelines. I'm sorry.
Imagine, timelines. The different timelines. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's like Rick and Morty kind of stuff. Rather than time traveling back down into their own past, they've gone to another timeline that is, for all intents and purposes, identical to their own ancient past. But it isn't their own ancient past. It's just another timeline. So they have, in a sense, hijacked our timeline. It depends on how kind you want to be to them, as to how strong and emotive the language you want to use. You could say, really, they've hijacked our timeline, and they have to use us as like free-range archaic humans, free-range ancient versions of themselves that whose gene pool they can dip into when they need to reinvigorate their own further generations and children. Now, having said that, they are known to Majestic as Orions, and that is because for tens of thousands of years, at one point in their own timeline, they came from an Earth, they left it and traveled to Orion, the middle star of Orion's belt. So that's called Al-Nalam, or Epsilon Orionis. They colonized an Earth-like planet orbiting Al-Nalam and were there for tens of thousands of years before deciding to travel interdimensionally, or time travel, or however you want to see it, to access ancient versions of themselves. But so their genetic stock is ours. They really are a version of us. They're very, very closely related to us, to the extent that they can. Those particular ones, the Mudgeon or the tall whites, they're so closely related to us that they can actually interbreed with us. Whereas other future humans, like some that are more like greys, couldn't copulate with us and produce offspring. They have to use other more, clinical procedures and things like that, with extracting sperm and ovum and growing versions of themselves and things like that. But yeah,
that's so interesting. What I was going to say was, okay. What are some of Charles Hall's other accounts like that he talks about?
Oh yeah, that's right. I was going to say that before. I think before we unfortunately had a bit of an interruption there with in the stream. But yeah, Charles Hall, one of his books, it's the 5th book. He's written 6. I'm not the biggest fan of his 6th book, number 6, but number 5, I'd recommend to people. The first 4 are good and the best. Number 5's excellent as well. Number 5 he calls The Greys. Now, in Charles Hall's own opinion, he was interacting with a different kind of alien to the aliens or ETs he was interacting with in the first 4 books, and he calls them Greys. He says they're tall Greys. Now, in the book itself, he never gives any reason as to why he calls them Greys. He says that they're wearing dark grey suits. Some of them are very tall. Some are obviously children and shorter, wearing these dark grey suits with masks, with long nose pieces. Now, I've seen suits like this, and I know that tall whites wear them. Nowhere in his first 4 books does he mention ever seeing tall whites wear these. But when he does finally interact with beings wearing these kinds of suits that I call boa suits, he says that they're Greys. Now, at one stage, he says he could see the skin on the face of one, and he doesn't say it's grey. He said it was yellow, looking like the light of his weather shack, yellow or orange, like the light of his weather shack. And I'm thinking, hold on a sec, like tall whites can look all different kinds of colours if you see them in different lighting as well, because they're like chalk white. If you have yellow lighting, blue lighting in your house, they do look like they're more yellow or more blue, even more than Homo sapiens would, of any kind of Homo sapien race, where they're just so white, much more white than, like I'm quite a pale person, much whiter than me. They're incredibly like paper white now. So now he called his book The Greys. So I go into that in detail in one of the later chapters in my book Children of Orion, where I talk about my reasons for believing that in that particular book, he was still interacting with tall whites, what he calls tall whites, what I call Mudgeon or Orions. But he just believed them to be another race. Now, it's a very interesting book because he went out to a different place, a different part of the mountains in Indian Springs, or beyond Indian Springs somewhere, I think, but in the larger area of the Nellis Air Force Base still, and was subjected to beings practicing stealth techniques on him at night in these suits, and even in my opinion, getting in his head and convincing him of realities, getting in his head and manipulating his sense of the narrative of events as they were happening to him and things like that. There was a lot of mental manipulation, in my opinion, being exerted on Charles Hall, particularly in that 5th book. But so that makes it a very interesting book, in my opinion. It is a book that shows you the training techniques that young tall whites go through to be able to use these suits for when they leave safe areas to wander about in our world, in Homo sapiens controlled zones, moving through the world and not being noticed, being able to exert mental manipulation on people that they come across to instill fear in people's minds, or to send, because this is another feature as well, that's that's shared in common by ancient fairy and elf beliefs, and then also the tall whites and other cryptoterrestrial races, is what you could call glamoury, casting glamours. Convincing you by sending an image into your mind that they do not look the way they actually look, convincing you that you're talking to someone that you know, maybe almost like it seems like a doppelganger. You'll be talking to a friend, you think it's your friend, you wander around the hill and your friend wasn't there. They've taken on a form. They haven't actually morphed physically to look like your friend, but they've projected into your mind in a hypnotic fashion, in a manipulative way, what they want you to see them as, and then you do. And in Charles Hall's 5th book, oh, sorry. I can't, your audio's gone, sorry, Robert.
Oh, I just want to say, is that familiar to like what fairy lore is like? When people talk about the fairies could appear to people as whatever they want, right? A fairy can not morph itself, but like it could, or maybe it could morph itself. We're not sure, but like they can also project in your mind, and the Greys do that too, right? They project things in your mind as to what they want you to see them as, right?
Yeah, that's right. And also that you are in places that you aren't, that you might be on board their ship, but to you it still looks like your bedroom and things like that. Yeah, that's right. Fake, like I suppose you could call them, in ufology, people often talk about screen memories, of course, where, that you will not remember something as it actually was, like an abduction experience, but there'll be some other memory, or that there'll be, a memory of having communicated with a being will be replaced to having communicated with an owl or a fox or some animal or something like that, and you're quite confused by that. I suppose there's that kind of I suppose there's some kind of equatable those things, screen memories and glamour or glamoury. But yeah, for sure, that's the in the old elf and fairy lore, and when we're talking about elves and fairies, it's sort of like those older ideas of elves and fairies and the Sheehan, like the Gaelic fairies and things, not necessarily like little women with wings as fairies or Santa's helpers at the North Pole for elves. But these older ideas, elf and fairy, used to be fairly interchangeable as terms in early modern times and the Middle Ages, to talk about these kinds of non-human entities, these beings that lived in subterranean dwellings, and that you'd have to appease, and it also, this ties in as well. I'm sort of rambling a bit, sorry, at the moment, but I'll just say at the moment that this also ties in, comparing and equating fairy lore and modern UFO lore or abduction phenomena, is that cattle mutilations.
Yeah.
Now, the fairies and elves would kill livestock that was coming too close to their underground habitations, and also injure and sometimes kill humans as well. Now this continues on till today, of course. I mean, there's huge amount of controversy about who's doing cattle mutilations nowadays, of course, and some people say it's the government doing it, or black ops, or that it's some kind of disinformation campaign trying to make people think that aliens are doing it, to think that aliens are more evil than they are and all this kind of stuff. But they do, I think they are responsible for some of them. Like tall whites are responsible, in particular tall whites, Mudgina, are responsible for some animal mutilations. In respect, in particular, to trying to exert psychological warfare against Homo sapiens that are living too close to their underground habitations. So you have a famous instance of Skinwalker Ranch that all your listeners are going to be very familiar with, I'm sure. But I go into my book a little bit about what I think the reasons are behind Skinwalker Ranch being one of the most haunted places on Earth and this sort of paranormal hotspot. It is, in my opinion, on or very close to tall white habitation, Mudgina habitation.
I never thought about that.
They don't play nice if you have dogs They don't like dogs. They think of dogs as being dangerous, especially around their children. Or B, if you're a hunter or have firearms, they don't have any sense of humor about that kind of thing, because they consider it to be a danger. So you have malicious and aggressive intent. Like, let's say you're setting traps, you've got a firearm and you're wandering around, you're going to shoot rabbits in the woods near your ranch or something like that. They don't consider that to be acceptable. They'll try to move you on so that another more acceptable family might occupy the property, or even better, produce, you know, such a strong negative folklore in the surrounding population of people in the area, in the town or in the state or whatever, so that no one in their right mind wants to live there because it's haunted.
I got a question. The guy that first originally inhabited Skinwalker Ranch, I can't remember his name, but he was the owner. He was a cattle farmer. So maybe they didn't like look. I mean, I'm not a vegan. I'm somewhat, but that's regardless. What I'm saying is, do they not like that? Do they not like the cattle or the cattle farming either? Is that?
Yeah, well, that's a thing. Yeah, that yes, that's right. Well, they are vegans in the they only eat plant products.
Yeah.
They don't eat animal products. They also refuse to wear any clothing that's made from animal products. They only wear synthetic clothing or plant-based clothing and things like that. Now, and it might seem like a contradiction where you say, hold on a sec, they're prepared to kill cattle, but they're vegans. Why are they vegans, and what's going on there, and why are they so prepared to be inhumane enough to just kill cattle to prove a point as a in their psychological warfare to drive out a family or something like that, or to eliminate the family's business or something like that. But the contradiction is, they, as you were saying and implying, they do not approve of this kind of agriculture, animal agriculture. They don't approve of that kind of those kinds of eating habits in us. And in an environmental sense, they see it as being contributing to an environmental decline of the biosphere, cutting down too much of our natural forests and habitat, replacing it with huge amounts of farmlands. You know, I don't want to go too much into this. I am a vegan, by the way. I don't want to go too much into this and make you show me ranting about that kind of stuff. But yes, they do have a dog in that fight, so to speak. They disapprove of it.
I'll tell you what, just on a personal quest, I've went more vegetarian lately. I went mostly fruits and vegetables. I mean, I do still eat some chicken and fish, but I mean, I've cut out like all pork, all red meat. And I used to be a heavy, well, not heavy, but I worked out. So protein was an essential for me. I thought it was, but then I realized you can get a lot of that from plant products. You know what I mean? You can get plant, and I don't want to turn this into a health episode, but I mean, I see your ways, and I see why but people think because when you eat fruits and vegetables, you get energy. When you eat meat, you don't really get energy. You know, I don't know what, I don't, at least I've never really got an energy burst, but when I drink a smoothie in the morning and it's fruits and vegetables, I get automatic energy. So that just should tell people something right there, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think all of the races that I know of vegans, you know, they don't, all of the CT races or whatever. But yeah, you're right. Meat, we don't need it, you know. And nowadays, in particular, you know, we can get all of the protein and all of the nutrients that we need from plant-based products and from, you know, meat substitutes and things like that in supermarkets. You know, if we were to return to hunter-gatherers, you know, it might be a little bit difficult to maintain vegan habits if all of a sudden, you know, there was some post-apocalyptic world where we're all scavenging around and you know, spearing deer or something like that, because then, you know, you really have to try and eat everything you possibly can because you're bordering on
survival.
You know, yeah.
I wanted to touch on two cases before we go. That two cases I thought were important that you bring conclusions on were the Bledsoe case and the Aveley case, Aveley, Aveley. I don't know if that's how I pronounce it, but those were two cases I thought were interesting that tie into this, right?
Yeah, that's right. Chris Bledsoe is pretty well known, I think pretty famous in ufology and paranormal research world, and the Fayetteville incident in 2007 was his first conscious experience. I'll say conscious experience because, in my opinion, he's probably had more experiences earlier in his life as well. But in the Fayetteville incident, for people who don't know about it, Christopher Bledsoe Sr. went with his son, Chris Bledsoe Jr., and a few contractors, because he was a builder. He was quite a successful businessman, building company. I'm not quite sure what he does for a cross nowadays, but this is what he was doing at the time, 2007. I think three contractors, acquaintances, friends of his, and his son and himself went down fishing. Now, he decided to go for a walk off into the woods, and he saw lights in the sky, tried to run away from. He heard initially, before he even got to the top of a hill, I think, and saw these lights, he could hear something invisible rustling through the bushes, like there was something following him, and he'd stop and look, and there's nothing there. That's quite a common thing through lots of different cases that lead up to abduction events with tall whites and whatnot. But where you'll hear them they'll even herd you in a certain place, but you won't be able to see them because they're wearing their suits and whatnot. But so he went up. I think he got to a top of a hill and he saw these lights in the sky, and he went to run away. I think he hid, and then he saw one coming up above him, but then he ran off. And when he got back, he'd been gone for hours, but didn't realize, classic missing time scenario. Didn't realize how long he'd been gone for. Many hours. I can't remember off the top of my head how many now, but it might have been like 5, a very, very long period of time, and he had no idea he'd been gone that far. But what disturbed him most of all was that his son was also missing. So there were just the 3 guys, the contractors there fishing. His son was also missing, and he said, "Where's my son?" And his son apparently had gone missing a fair while before as well to look for him. So he ran back to the woods and found his son cowering in the bushes, and his son still remembered what had happened to him. He'd been hiding when there were these small beings with glowing red eyes that were sort of blinking in and out, going invisible and then coming back again, and they were playing. I think they were playing with bottles and things like this. And when the other guys were looking for the 2 Bledsoes, the beings would disappear when the truck went past, and then they'd reappear again. And so Chris Bledsoe's son, Chris Bledsoe Jr., was in the bushes hiding from these beings until they let him leave again. I'm not quite sure if he was paralyzed and couldn't move, in that they were exerting some kind of manipulation on his mind, which they can do, or whether he was simply just frightened of them and waiting till they'd left. But they all got in, and then there were lots of stars in the sky that began to fall, and then all of them all together back at the original position saw that all these stars were all falling out of the sky and landing across the river and craft in the sky. And then some of the beings started galloping on all 4s after them as they were trying to get out in the truck, actually chasing them like gazelle, like quadrupeds, which is another thing that tall whites do, especially their children. They can run on all 4s. Their arms are longer than ours relative to their body length, and they can quite naturally move around on all 4s. And Charles Hall talks about that. I've seen them doing that several occasions when I was a kid. I remember them doing that, as playing with them, with their children, being watched by the tall, dark ones with glowing red eyes in the other suits. And then so he ended up dropping people off with craft following them. And when the 2 Bledsoes got back to their house, Chris Bledsoe looked outside. Chris Bledsoe Sr. looked outside and saw a 7-foot tall being walking around in the garden. And they drove off. They drove off again and parked a vehicle in the middle of the field and slept there the night. Now, since then, he's had lots of hypnotic regression sessions and found out a lot of what happened to him in that missing time, that considerable amount of missing time in the original event. And he has come to be a well-known experiencer, and his family have experienced lots of different things. His wife's experienced things. But they have this double aspect happening where and Chris Bledsoe's case is particularly informative and helpful when you're profiling and trying to describe these beings and add to a list of characteristics. And assign to them different appearances and things like that they can take on, is that not only did he have these more typical sort of ET abduction phenomena, but shadow people, poltergeist activity. Now, these things, as people who've studied ufology will be quite aware, or paranormal research in general, people that see UFOs or have abduction experiences, quite often, this will also come with ghostly figures in their house, disembodied voices, televisions turning themselves on and off, radios coming on, footsteps on the roof, footsteps down the stairs, shadow beings moving through the house.
I was going to say, what do you think the shadow people have to do with it? Do you think they're separate entities, or do you think that a portal gets triggered when people see UFOs and maybe a portal opens up, or do you think the shadow beings are the cryptoterrestrials in disguise?
They are them. Yeah, definitely. Well, some, I won't say all shadow people are cryptoterrestrials, but most of them, and certainly the ones that I've seen, and certainly in Christopher Bledsoe's case, they are. When they're wearing these boa suits, sometimes they can be completely invisible, still casting shadows. Sometimes they'll look like a dark mass moving around. So yeah, shadow people are cloaking ETs. That's what shadow people are, or most shadow people encounters are. Poltergeist activity, most poltergeist activity, in my opinion, and I argue in my book and in my other book coming up, most poltergeist activity is not deceased human related. It is CT related or ET related. Now, sometimes they are trying to, that can happen for heaps of different reasons, but they might be trying to scare you because they don't, like I said, like in the Skinwalker Ranch case, they might not want you somewhere and they're trying to expel your family or you from a certain place. Or sometimes you'll be having interactions with them, partially remembered interactions, shadow people, poltergeist activity, because they are interested in you because you are part of their breeding program, and not consciously know that you are. That's another reason a house can be haunted, So yeah, typical cases of haunting are cryptoterrestrial interactions. Now, that's not to say that there aren't such things as ghosts that are, residue of deceased people left over or something like that. I don't know about that, but I definitely do know that most hauntings are related to these beings. So when you've got a haunted, so if someone says to me, my house is haunted, things keep going missing. Things are taken away and then replaced or put back in the wrong place. I hear voices in the house at night, footsteps at night, dark shapes standing over me at night that are then gone. People touching me in the middle of the night and things like that. I'm like, okay, you're a cryptoterrestrial experiencer. And not that, so your house isn't haunted necessarily. You have some involvement with them. And it's the tip of the iceberg. There's lots of experiences you've had that you wouldn't remember.
Wow.
And lots of people have experiences with them and never remember anything and don't even think of their house as being haunted as well. But those people who think that their house is haunted, usually, in my opinion, are cryptoterrestrial experiences in some fashion or another. But Chris Bledsoe's case, yeah, so he had these kind of things going on in association with each other. So, typical classic poltergeists, shadow people, negative feelings, and all that kind of stuff. Stuff moved around, and then also, seeing craft or being taken at night by tall beings. Yeah, so with Chris Bledsoe, he's an excellent case because you can see both those sides of it happening. And I think Grant Cameron, famous Canadian researcher, everyone would know, I'm sure. He knows Chris Bledsoe quite well, and I think either the first time he ever went to Chris Bledsoe's house or one of the original times anyway, there was this dramatic experience where they were inside together and Chris Bledsoe's dogs kept coming inside, and Grant Cameron and Chris Bledsoe would like wave them away and say, "What are you doing?" and close the front door. And then they'd sit down and he'd be talking to Grant again, and then the dogs were back inside, and he kept ushering them out and they kept coming back inside, right? So then they went out in the garden, and they were talking in the garden, and one of the dogs ran past and blood was streaming from its throat.
It gets sliced open like instantaneously, right? The way he puts it. I've heard this. Yeah, it's amazing, right?
Yeah, it's spraying all along Grant Cameron's jeans, copious amounts of blood, and then they weren't quite sure what they were going to do, and I think they were trying to stop the bleeding, and then all of a sudden it was stopped, and the dog wanders off, and it's fine. Now, what happened? In my opinion,
Wasn't that
what happened?
from the Chris Bledsoe? They were saying that Bledsoe maybe had some healing properties, and maybe the ETs gave him that.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a lot to that as well, where Chris Bledsoe, where people in the community near him believe now that he has healing properties, and there's a tree in his yard that burst into flames at one stage. There's a whole story behind that as well, where Mel Gibson wanted to make a movie about Chris's story, and so Chris put the question to the beings, and a tree burst into flames as well, which is, you know, very biblical symbolism or whatever. But whether that means yes or hell no, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, I don't think that movie Mel Gibson sort of never ended up making that movie. But still, I think the tree itself, I think I've heard people talking about how Chris has put people that have physical problems, illnesses of different kinds, maladies, he's put their clothing in the tree, and it's helped them somehow, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a separate facet of like perhaps healing properties associated with Chris Bledsoe as well. And yes, he put his hand on the dog, I think, and he was trying to staunch the blood, stop the blood flow, and it did work. It stopped, and then the dog was completely fine. In my opinion, what happened there with the Grant Cameron Chris Bledsoe situation was that the Mudgeonah, the tall whites, were there in his yard, and the kids were playing. And when he's been hypnotized at different stages, he said the children come to my yard and play. That's something that he's on record being hypnotized as, that Chris Bledsoe said that he. Now they don't like dogs, as I said before, the tall whites. They distrust them. You know, they're quite flighty around them, disturbed by them.
Dogs can see them too, right? Dogs can see,
and that's also, that must be particularly annoying to them, that when they're trying to, hoodwink Homo sapiens, it might be easy enough, but dogs have, of course, you're right, like preternatural smell and hearing, and can sense cloaking cryptoterrestrials when they prefer not to be sensed, probably, which is another reason to not like them, as well as them being fearful for their children and things like that quite often. So I think the dogs were being sent back inside by the cryptoterrestrials, and Chris Bledsoe kept letting them out. And they kept
it's like a funny thing back and forth, right?
and so finally, when they all came out in the garden, in my opinion, one of the children, and they wear these clawed hands.
Oh my God, that makes sense.
Got frightened and actually slashed the dog's throat, which is what they use them for. They slash animals' throats if they're threatened. And then there was this kerfuffle. And then, in my opinion, probably Chris Bledsoe and Grant Cameron were switched off, were frozen, while the cryptoterrestrials tried to work out how they're going to heal the dog. And they ended up healing the dog and then switching them back up. Because the thing is, with tall whites, they seem to have they have an inability of, they don't heal quickly themselves. This is part of the issues that they have with their own genomic structure. Their bodies take much longer to heal than ours do. Now, even though they have these advanced technologies that can heal us very quickly and heal animals of the earth very quickly, they themselves are haunted by these issues where they find it very difficult, even with their advanced technologies, to heal their own bodies if they get cuts, and are particularly prone to infections and things like this. But but Chris Bledsoe's case, just a wonderful, just an amazing case, and it's ongoing. He and his family continue to have experiences. His son, it's not the son, Chris.
His son Chris was on the Tinfoil Hat podcast. He was he came on Sam Tripoli's Tinfoil Hat podcast, and he was saying that aliens are real, that they're interdimensional, and he was saying that maybe they don't have the best outlook for humanity, but he thinks maybe there's different ones or something. I would have to go back and listen to that. But I didn't take him seriously, because I was like, okay, I'm interested in your dad's case. I was like, it's cool that you're on Tinfoil Hat, because I love that show. It's with Sam Tripoli. He's like a comedian, but he does it's a big conspiracy podcast, you know. But I was like, so I'll give him the respect of being on the show, but it's more like his dad that I want to hear about the experience. It's like, you know what I mean? That's how I thought about that. What about the Avely case? What's that? I've never heard of that. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm sorry. I just these cases are so good.
Yeah, the Avely case. Yeah, that's one that I haven't heard about much, but I found in an old Flying Saucer review magazine, or a couple spread over a couple of issues of FSR magazine, that old Flying Saucer review. Yeah, and I talk about that in my book because it's incredibly interesting. There was a couple. I think it's pronounced Avely, but I've never heard it pronounced, but I'm not. But Avely abduction. There's a family. It was, the couple, the two adults and their three children were driving a car one day, saw a star in the sky that seemed to be moving, and then it was like it was following parallel with them, and then there was a mist. There was a cloud or a mist, like a wall of mist that they drove into, and then they drove out of it in another area, another district, which really freaked them out, as you can imagine. And it wasn't until later on when they did hypnotic regression and things like that that they found out more about what had happened there, where they had been on board a craft. Two of the children were asleep anyway. So it was just one of the children was awake for this, and the two adults, the husband and wife, taken on board, and they were separated, and they were asked to lie on tables, and they were inspected. And they were actually shown a lot of things. And particularly the guy, I think he had a lot of questions for them, and they were very open. And talked about, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but a lot of the propulsion systems that they use on their craft.
Wow.
And the kind of technologies that they wear when they're outside. And they said, they also admitted that they're time travelers. They said, now there were two different races. There was tall, fair ones with blue eyes. And then there was short, dark beings with big pointed ears and like fur and big clawed hands. Now they were told that they were from another time, and they were shown like some kind of projection or a hologram, and they said, this is the history of the world, our past and your future. Take this message to mankind, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing heavily here, but so there was this implication that they're future versions of ourselves. They said, we live underneath your oceans, we live in your mountains. We have been here for a long time, and we require you to help us. So basically the kind of stuff I've been talking about so far in the interview sort of aligns with these kinds of ideas. Time travelers of a kind, requiring us for genetic assistance. Now the small beings are interesting because there's a kind of being that is another future human that is a brown color. Now these are the beings that are in the Virginia incident in Brazil that I think that's from the 90s.
Yeah, Roger Lear went over that. They went over that. That's an interesting case. Yeah.
Oily skinned, brown skin, I think glowing red eyes, 3 ridges across the tops of their skulls. Those kinds of beings, the Majina have told me, are called Sebedjena, which are another kind of future human. But normally when they're outside their craft, they wear helmets that have big pointy ears. And they also have a suit that has like a brown suit, skin tight, that has like fluff or fur on it. So it's my opinion that the people in the Avely case saw the tall whites, but also saw Sebedjena wearing these suits, not actually seeing them as they are. And their faces, their nose, they have a bit that comes up. Their head, the helmets kind of look like a bat's head, like a vampire bat, with a sort of pointed nose and pointed ears and eyes out. So like the beings in the Kentucky Goblins are them.
Yeah, well. the Hopkinsville Goblin case. Yeah,
Hopkinsville Goblins. Yeah. They're Sebedjena in their suits, but they're wearing their suits. They don't actually look. Their heads don't look like that. Their heads are. They got their actual faces are much more like a stereotypical grey kind of look, but they're brown with 3 pronounced ridges on their skull. And then when they wear these helmets. But anyway, yeah. So I think in the Avely case, there were those two races side by side that are close allies, the Sebedjena and the Majina.
You know, it's so interesting. These old cases are so interesting, and they tie everything together. You're making me see to finalize everything and to finish up here. You're making me see a clear picture that these beings not only really exist, but they might be the culprits behind a lot of different things, and all these different stories tie them together. Bledsoe, Hall, Jacques Vallée talked about it. Mac Tony's. It's all drawing a similar picture, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, different elements of the larger, greater narrative. Yeah. And I just love it, man. I mean, you obviously love it yourself, just investigating all this kind of stuff.
I love that you bring the evidence that points to the old cases, because I think we need that, right? I mean, like, to try to identify what this phenomena is, and maybe there's other phenomena going on too. Like, we don't know what the grays are, and I'm wondering if there really are reptilians. I hear there are from many different people. Like, what are your thoughts on reptilians, real quick?
Yeah, I'm not popular in this respect, I don't think, because I don't think that those exist. Now, I think, in my opinion, reptilians is a misidentification of some of the future human races that have scaly skin and claws. So this is how this has sort of begun. Also, the tall whites, when they're wearing these boa suits, tall, lanky, dark beings, glowing red eyes and claws, cloaking and shape-shifting only in the sense that they can, make you think they look like, different people
or a reptilian.
Well, that's also an element too, because they can project something that conforms to your preconceived ideas about what things look like. They can utilize your own vocabulary of ideas and your own belief system and paradigm and cosmology, your own religious beliefs, your own beliefs about ghosts and the paranormal, preconceived ideas about what ETs are and things like that, and they can slip that on like a glove. And if they think it will assist in them communicating with you, facilitating communication, or manipulating you for some reason, they feel that you need to be informed about something or manipulated in some way, helped even, or whatever, helped along, they're masters of deceit and deception in that as well. So yeah, in my personal opinion, I don't think reptilian ETs exist. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that say that they do, and are forthright and honestly, genuinely saying they've had experiences with these beings and things like that. I doubt it that they're real, though, that they have a real objective physical base in reality. I think that they're misidentifications most of the time.
It's a different race, basically. It's some race, but it's a different race than what people think that around the reptilian. Like, that's pretty interesting. I don't have any other questions. I'm trying to think. Can you tell everybody where they can find the book, and if they have questions for you or anything like that, where they can find you?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Robert. My book, Children of Orion, Finding the Cryptoterrestrials, is published by Flying Disc Press, and it's just available on Amazon. So your paperback, hardcover, and digital. We were going to have it as an audiobook there at one stage, but that all fell through, unfortunately. And I have a YouTube channel, which is just my name, if people want to check that out. Post things on there occasionally, just sort of like a vlog, Ryan Musgrave Evans. And I'm not on social media anymore. I pulled the plug on that. People can send me email if they'd like. They just go into the, if you go onto my YouTube channel and go into the About section, you'll find my email under business inquiries if people want to have a yarn about anything, have a question. Cool. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. And I always have an interesting time talking to you, man. This was great.
Thank you, Robert. Good on you, mate. Thanks for the invite.
I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you soon. I'll send you a link when I upload it too. Okay. Thanks. Bye.